Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Eco Stage, powered by TLMI. I'm Rosalind Bandy. I have the privilege of leading sustainability for TLMI. And if you've looked at our agenda in the back, you'll see that we have a full slate of speakers from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Every day of Label Expo. So there's a variety of information. If you have time, stop back and see what's next. Right now, we're going to learn a little bit about ISRI. If you're not familiar with ISRI, that is the Institute of Scrap Recycler Industries. And this year was a really monumental year because thanks to a collaborative effort between TLMI and C-Lab, we were able to convince ISRI that paper release liner, silicone-coated release liner, is actually recyclable. And ISRI has a circular that includes all recyclable materials and codes according to what those materials are for recyclers to look at. One of the people that was really instrumental in getting data, studies, and information to ISRI so that they would consider plastic or a paper release liner is Jim Sheibley. And Jim is here today to talk about this really monumental decision by ISRI that will hopefully help all of us get paper release liner into the hands of more recyclers. So, Jim, come on up.
Thank you. All right, as Roz said, I am a recent co-chair of TLMI's Sustainability Committee and also one of the founding members of C-Lab. And we've been working to make progress in the front for more than a decade. So there is good news on the front of our effort to broaden acceptance of what I call recovered sorted release liner at recycled paper mills. ISRI, as you learned from Roz, Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries, has recognized release liner. And what I've got up on the screen here is the cover shot of ISRI specs that come out each year. It's March publication. And if you're not familiar with ISRI, they are a massive organization, industry organization that covers everything from metals, ferrous, non-ferrous metals, glass. Paper is one small category inside that, plastics, electronics, textiles, and tires and rubber. So they deal with hundreds of millions of tons of recycled product all across North America on an annual basis. So they call themselves the voice of the recycling industry, which also implicitly means they get to kind of say who's in and who's out and who's qualified and who isn't. So I'm personally excited that release liner is now in the ISRI spec book as of 2022, and you should be too. So I'm going to play you a 40-second movie clip to show you just how you should feel about release liner being in the ISRI spec book. So I'll take you back if you're an international person, or if you're maybe less than about 45 years old, you weren't alive in 1979, you got to know who Steve Martin is. So it's 1979. Steve Martin has the hit movie The Jerk, and he makes his character as a, how did I describe it? A simpleton finding joy in exaggerated responses. Implicitly, therefore, I'm a simpleton, but we're going to give this a shot. So let me see if I can play this clip to remind you of how you should feel. Miguel, you got the sound, I hope.
Thank you. The new phone book's here! The new phone book's here!
Well, I wish I could get that excited about something.
Nothing! Are you kidding? Page 73! Johnson! Maven! R! I'm somebody now! Millions of people look at this book every day! This is the kind of spontaneous publicity, your name in print, that makes people! I'm in print! Things are going to start happening to me now.
All right, so that's the way we should feel about release liner. The ISRI is kind of the gatekeeper of what's tolerable and allowed. So I'll tell you a short story. We're conversing with ISRI, it was almost a year and a half ago, and one of the people on the video conference call is the kind of gatekeeper of the largest containerboard company in the world, and we're talking to him about release liner. He's like, no way, that stuff can't come into our paper mills. We don't let that stuff in our paper mills. So that's what we were faced with when we first got into ISRI, is people going, nah, poison, don't want to let that stuff in here. So let me give you a sense of what, we'll dive down now into ISRI and what they call the guidelines for paper stock. Each paper material has a designated category. There are dozens and dozens of materials in those categories, and few that I put up here as an example. Everybody knows the back of every mall in America and every grocery store in America, there's a baler and there's old corrugated containers. So that is category 11. Poly-coated cup stock. So poly one side or poly two side cup stock is a traded commodity in North America. That's category 3S. These paper mills, like the one I was just telling you about, Pratt Industries, they accept aseptic and gable top containers, poly two-side, sometimes with foil, often with a HDPE cap on the top of them, and they successfully recycle them in their containerboard mills. The kind of gold standard is what was known as SOP, or sorted office pack. That's category 37. Everybody wants that, but fewer and fewer people working in offices, so that delightful white paper, well sorted, is less and less available. And then the classic Boy Scout drive of old magazines is OMG, that's category 10. Now take your eyes down to the bottom of the screen. The other thing that comes along with each of these commodities, scrap commodities, is a prohibitive and an outthrow. And we'll come back to that. So there are prohibitive materials that by their presence make the product unsaleable for that grade. And jump ahead, a poly label on top of SCK release liner is going to be one of those prohibitive materials. So those have a certain percentage of what they'll tolerate, and then outthrows are materials unsuitable for that grade, but probably will still go through the process and they won't try to get them out. As an example, you'll see like cores traveling along with SCK liner as I don't want it, but if it falls in the process in a limited amount, we can tolerate it. So that's how ISRI does guidelines. Eye chart here, heads up. So now look at we're going to take a look at the book. So the ISRI book is about 70 pages deep. The paper sector comes from page 28 to about 35. And for when you or one of your label applicators interacts with a waste hauler, you can send them to page 28 and say, here's how we set up. Here's an overview of the paper portion. Here's how we and waste haulers set up an agreement to take material away. Here's what the obligations of the seller are. So they've defined all this in a reasonably structured way of here's how you trade commodities in paper. And then over on the right side for you, we're at the tail end of the paper category items, and tucked way down there at the bottom, the most recent edition is category 37S, which is siliconized release liner. And yes, we tried to tell ISRI not to put silicone release liner, but they put silicone in there. So we are the last edition of those 20-some specialty grades added into the book. And you'll be able to use that as a reference to send a waste hauler there. So if you're a label converter that happens to spin off labels, or your customer that's a label applicator that, as Roz and I like to say, liberates liner, you have to set up an agreement between the waste hauler and yourselves to come to an agreement on quality specs. Now, what I've done here is this happens to be the quality spec of inbound material for the North America's second largest containerboard company, WestRock. So they sent me an example of how they as a company set a specification. So they reference ISRI, they reference ISRI, but then they have their own rules that they say, if you want to send stuff into our mill, you got to follow this. And what I've done here is mock that up for you in the industry to use to say, if you're co-packer X, Carry Foods, or someone like that, you can put together a specification, or if you're a label converter, you can and should push this to your label applicator and say, here's what we propose as what your specification should be for that liner when it goes to the back door and gets picked up by the hauler. So references out to ISRI, gives you instant credibility, describe what it is, come to an agreement on what the packing requirements could be. Some may say, if it's not in a wire wrap bale, I won't take it. And others may say, if it's in a Gaylord and you got at least 800 pounds in there, I'll take it. So you need to come to an agreement on that. And then in each and every one of those specs, they have a prohibitive limit and an outthrows limit. So I've drafted this for your imitation. So on the prohibitives would be, if you're sending them SCK line or a glassine liner, no plastics, no shrink, no poly-coated liner. They could probably handle PK liner, but you haven't agreed to that. So you can think about, yeah, they're over there taking aseptic packaging and cup stock, but that's not the commodity you're telling them. So keep the poly-coated liner out of there. No foils, metals, glass, rubber, wax, foam, wood, filmic labels. That's going to probably be your hardest one, and preferably no adhesive. So don't dump your adhesive in there. Obviously the labels and adhesive travel together. On the outthrows, which is tolerable, but they ask you to avoid them, would be tubes, cores, and people throwing other stuff in there that are like, oh, it's a recycle mill, I can just throw that in there. The more pure you can make your release liner that's to the eye, not a contaminated byproduct, the less likely you are both to be downgraded in what they'll pay you for it or kicked out of the stream because you keep poisoning them with prohibitives. Don't put the bales outside. That moisture spec is common all around the paper industry, so if they get rained on, they are not going to pay for water. And there have been plenty of stories over the years, John Smith, plenty of stories over the years of people putting water on a bale because they want to get $100 for that ton of waste, but 20% of it is water. So don't get your bales wet. And then the last thing also that sets the minimum standard for your employees or your label applicator is things that are unacceptable. Poisonous, dangerous substances, medical waste, food waste, free-flowing liquids. The guys running recycle plants, I used to be responsible for a recycle plant in Minnesota. We get a bale of old magazines and clippings, and inside the bale, which is about this long and this square, was an engine block. Somebody'd hidden an engine block in the baler to get it off site. So you get this bale that weighs 2,000 pounds, of which 400 was a hunk of iron tucked inside the baler. So those would be unacceptable. So please take this, imitate it freely, and put it to use. Okay, we'll come back to the do's and don'ts. Do collect spent release liner after you've applied labels, or get your customers to do that depending on where you are in the supply chain. Do assure that it's free of prohibited and unaccepted materials. Do guide and train your employees, because the experience, if you're here for Cal, the experience over the years is you get a site set up and they do well, and then somebody leaves and somebody gets promoted and something happens and they backslide and they start getting sloppy, and then their product is not accepted at the mill anymore. So the more you can put standard operating procedures in place, the more you can put a sign where the liner gets collected that sets those standards, the more likely you are to kind of hang on to that gain over the years. Do contact a waste hauler and work with them, and they are going to set the rules on bundling and packaging in minimum quantities. Do insist that this stuff is recyclable. It is very common to be told it isn't, and that's why we're excited to have this in the ISRI spec that says, yes it is, it's S37. And it is accepted at an increasing number of sites. So we have our the Georgia Pacific tissue and towel plants, we have SCA tissue accepting, we have the Sustana fiber guys in Wisconsin, and frankly we know that release liner goes in limited quantities into very many brown container board mills just in that single stream recovery site. Do lead your customers and the waste haulers to clab.org and tlmi.com. You'll hear more about CLAB on the next hour from Chuck and Brian. And don't give up. It's taken a while and it will take longer to get this done, but don't give up. Don't allow contaminants to get into your release liner bins. That is going to frustrate those haulers, and they have many other people to go to, so they will kick you out if you contaminate their system, or they will downgrade what they pay you after they've agreed to a price. Don't take no for an answer. As I mentioned about those container board mills, they often will say, oh, we can't take that stuff. And now we have some defenses and support for you to say, yes, you can, and it's accepted. Do share that ISRI information and the references, and you tell two friends and they'll tell two friends, and we'll make more progress in the industry for release liner recovery. So we need to keep building momentum, because part of what ISRI expects is if you get on the list, it's because you are a known national commodity traded in truckload quantities at the thousands of tons level. They don't have time for little dinky systems. You know, the corrugated container is a 70 million ton a year commodity. That's 100 times bigger than all of the release liner in North America. So you got to remember what the scale is of what they're trying to accomplish. We need to get product moving to stay relevant to them. And I want to put thanks out to the Steve Miner at Sistana, who helped Roz and me kind of break open the doors at the ISRI Paper Committee to get progress in there, and the GP and SCA tissue folks that have been willing to take this on and accept it as a good fiber source for years. Some references for you. ISRI goes under isri.org or scrap.org. The scrap.org is their newsletter site that will get you on an information feed, and the ISRI is where you'll burrow in and find the guidelines and the specs and things of that sort. Of course, there's TLMI, and I put Roz's email down there as well. clabglobal.org is where you'll find the circular economy for the label industry, and you come in there at the global and find your way to North America, and then in North America you can find your way to known haulers and collection sites and partners we have there. So go in and burrow your way down. And I'm Jim. You can find me there if you want to ask some other questions. And you really should just go back and watch some more Steve Martin YouTube videos. It's like 5 more I could have used. So that's my my talk. What questions do you have?
Any questions for Jim? Release liner recycling.
You should ask them. Yes.
My name is Ginjamin from Kruger. So I just want to know how many tons of release liner are being recycled in North America per year. Do you have any idea?
How many tons of release liner are recycled in North America? So I'll imaginary pie chart. Release liner, rough numbers, 600,000 tons of paper, like you guys make, and about 150,000 tons of mostly polyester release liner. The paper release liner, about, remember Roz, like 10 to 13% gets recycled. Another 10 to 20% goes into waste to energy and other uses, and all the rest is landfill. Over on the polyester side, it's similar, not a lot different. So you're working with a marketplace that's 600,000 tons. We're just barely relevant to ISRI now, so we need to keep pushing that up. So we need, Wyagamac to open the doors and take more in. Good question. Another good question would be, what about polyliner, polyester? So over on the polyester side, we aren't at a scale yet that ISRI would pay attention to us, and the systems aren't as developed in those truckload quantities in bulk. So when we get more developed and we think we have enough relevance for ISRI, we can take that case to them. In this case, we went into the paper group, and we have to go over in the plastics group, which is led, and the decision makers are a completely different set of people, but we hope that day will come. Any others? What about the matrix, John? So your other speakers that were on this list, so yesterday Marco Acevedo from Precision Air Convey gave a presentation on the ROI of matrix blown through their recovery systems into a collection facility. Unfortunately, our baler guy bailed on us, pun intended, at noon, but you combine a Precision Air Convey system for a converter, pushing the trim, chopped trim, into a bale or a compactor, and then these guys will press it into a pellet and send it to a power plant where it works as a carbon offset. So you can do the math, I can do the math for you. So every ton of matrix that you send there displaces a ton of coal for the most part, or natural gas, and you can get some really attractive values if you use any carbon offset value along the way. So that's what you do with your matrix. And if you live in an area where we don't have a mill that will take your release liner, this is the next best thing.
If you're going to be around 10 a.m. tomorrow, Convergent Energy is going to talk about their process for engineering.
That hurt me too. Any others? Okay, thanks for your time.